everyone. Hi. Let us know if you are joining us live. I'm just going to wait a few seconds in case anyone wants to join us live and just say hi, give a little wave in the comments, or tell us how you're doing. And you can let us know as well what you experience when it comes to tech, social media. What is your current relationship with tech and social media like? I want to know where we're kind of starting off here. And maybe while we are waiting, I wanted to tell you guys about a workshop that I have coming up. Well, it's actually a masterclass. I'm calling it a masterclass because I'll just be teaching. It won't be as interactive as the workshops I've done, but it'll be all about self-authorship. So self-authorship is something that I work with a lot with my clients, and essentially it's what it sounds like, right? Like you are authoring your own life, your own career. You get to decide what that looks like instead of it being determined by everybody else, what they think, their judgments, the standards in your, or the norms in your profession. And so it's almost like a way of being in the world where you are in the driver's seat instead of being kind of, I was going to say washed around, instead of being like dragged around, driven around by other things. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to also have a focus on what we would call people pleasing. So things like, not being able to set boundaries, worrying about what other people think, what their judgments are, always wanting to have people think of you a certain way, think that you're a good person, think that you're nice or kind. And this can be one of the ways that we feel like life is just kind of happening to us, that we sort of have to just adapt to other people, right? Just to please them, to keep them happy, to keep the peace. And so it is essentially one of the ways in which we keep ourselves very small and feel like we don't have agency over our lives. And so we'll be going into that in that workshop, in that class. So that'll be in 2 weeks' time. That is the 17th of October. It'll be at this time, so 5:30 on a Thursday. But I will make sure to pop those details into the Facebook group, and I'll be talking about it quite a bit. So hopefully you won't miss that. But I just wanted to alert you to look out for that, because it's going to be amazing. Okay, awesome. So today we're talking about tech and social media. Even if you're watching in the replay, I'd love for you to just put in the comments, like, where are you at with this? What is your relationship with tech and social media like? Is it a beautiful relationship? Is it a fraught relationship? Mainly, if you're interested in a topic like this, where we, talking about boundaries, you might be feeling overwhelmed by it, stressed out by it. You might feel anxious when you go on social media, or just knowing that you are constantly available on like email and text, and it just feels kind of overwhelming and anxiety provoking. So you might be in the space where you're just like, oh, social media. Put boundaries down, get rid of it completely, like some version of that, right? Like this love-hate relationship with it. And I first want to just remind you of the love part of it, just the miracle of it all, right? Like, I think we focus a lot, and for such good reason, right? Sorry, it's telling me that my frame rate is too low. Okay. I'm not sure. Let me just see. Anyway, I don't think I can just change that randomly in the middle. Just like randomly let me know a few minutes into my live. Anyway, hopefully you guys can see me fine, and whatever the frame rate is supposed to do is functioning okay. Yes, so there are very good reasons why people have concerns about social media and tech, and why there is so much conversation about setting boundaries and limiting the use of that. Those are completely valid, and we will be going into that. But I do just want to remind you of how incredible it is that we have these things. Like, it is insane. Sorry, I also just realized my light went off. Speaking of tech, anyway, okay, so we have like the most incredible tools at our disposal, right? We are connected to people all over the world. We can work from home now, which we never were able to do. We can be exposed to like incredible people that we would never have been exposed to previously, right? We, I mean, safety wise, right? Like if you go out, you are contactable the whole time. Someone, if something is going wrong, they can get hold of you very quickly. In past lifetimes, that was not the case. So there are just amazing, beautiful things about social media and about tech that I think we just mustn't forget when we are talking about this, and not to have this like very one-sided conversation about that. So that's the one part of it. Then also there's this very interesting process that happens with the brain. So if you are not having social media around, right, one of the things you might notice is that your brain will still try and distract you. So there's this like a video of this guy, like, hundreds of years ago. There was no tech. Their world was like very calm and quiet. There's not that much going on. It was just like his little village. And he was trying to like design this contraption that would go around his head to like block out distractions, because he was like, I try and work, but then like the whole time I'm like being distracted. But anyway, it was just kind of the story about how our brains naturally want to do that. So social media, for example, is something very easy, and it is very addictive in its nature. So it tends to be the thing that we go to. But our brain naturally will try and find something more comfortable when we are bored or are experiencing discomfort. So one of the situations that you might be able to relate to very strongly is the experience of sitting down to finish your notes for the day. Like either it's like after a patient, or now you're catching up on notes, or you just have to do a few notes before you go to your lunch break or whatever. And you start doing it and you just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be doing these notes. And so you like reach for your phone. That distraction was from you. It was internal. And then you reached for something, and the easiest thing is that your phone is right there. Your social media apps are probably on it. It's a very easy thing to reach for when you are wanting that distraction. But just notice this in your brain. Notice that you first were usually uncomfortable, like there's usually an uncomfortable emotion that we're trying to sort of distract ourselves from, or we're bored. And our brain will experience that discomfort, will experience that boredom, and then it will look for something to distract it. Sometimes that's just by thinking about something else. Sometimes that's by, doing another activity. Like you suddenly get an idea to organize your sock drawer. Like, another common experience, like when we are studying for exams and now we just want to like organize our whole room. That is the brain looking for distraction, right? We have always done this. Even before social media and tech, it just provides a very easy way for us to be distracted, and it's also in its nature very addictive and much higher kind of dopamine release than organizing your sock drawer, for example. So there definitely are aspects of it that are way more extreme than we've ever had in the past. But I just do want you to start noticing almost the moment in between when you are in a specific situation to when you start reaching for your phone or reaching for Instagram, whatever it is, right? Because it feels so automatic. But just see if you can create a little bit of that gap and just notice what your brain is doing. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss here is the idea between the idea of the difference between adaptive versus technical challenges. So usually people see something like this as just a technical problem. And this is why you'll get advice like, put a timer on your browser so that it alerts you when you've been on social media for a while, or that it blocks certain websites, right? Or that you set a timer on your phone, or you delete the apps from your phone, or you delete the apps entirely, you deactivate your account, autoresponders, all of these things for, let's say, more email, or, on WhatsApp, that you go to another, like delete WhatsApp and just, people have to email you, or whatever it is, right? Like there are these technical fixes, and for some people those are really helpful, and usually it's the combination of this and what I'll be talking about now, which is adaptive problems. But usually we have some sort of like easy fix, right? And that easy fix assumes that that is all that is needed in order to fix the problem. And so I just also want to normalize this and to let you know that if those solutions have not worked for you, there is nothing wrong with you. And you don't need to beat yourself up about it and think there's something wrong with you. It's just that you've been using a technical solution rather than an adaptive solution. An example of this, for like in a separate area of our life, which might be easier to maybe see, is, let's say you hate running, and someone tells you, you just have to put your running shoes at the door. And then you try that and you're like, well, that did not work. Because it's not the biggest reason that you're not running, right? So it's like a similar thing. And it's part of that thing of, your brain is going to look for something to distract it and to, sometimes numbing out, sometimes what they call like buffering, like when you have certain emotions and you're just trying to like have some sort of buffer between you and that difficult emotion. So there can be other reasons that are in some sense like deeper. So I just want you to know, if those things haven't worked for you, that is totally fine. It can also just be like part of the solution, right? But it's maybe not everything. So for example, on a Sunday, I take a complete social media break. I don't go on social media at all on a Sunday. And it is incredibly helpful. Like sometimes I think like, oh, do I really need to do that? It's not such a big deal if I go on social media all the time. But just having one day where I don't have social media, like I'm sometimes surprised by how much of a difference it makes. So it definitely can be part of the solution, right? That can be an example of a boundary you set. One day a week, I'm not going to be on social media at all. Or you say, I'm going to delete the app off my phone so that I only access it on the computer, because then there's just a little bit more of a barrier to doing it, and I'm less likely to just automatically go onto social media, right? You might say, okay, I'm going to put an autoresponder on my email so that I'm not tempted to check it the whole time. I'm going to, put some message on my WhatsApp that says I will respond within whatever amount of time, right? Those can be all part of the solution, and those are all ideas of boundaries. And I'd love for you guys to share yours as well, like what has worked for you. But then just knowing that sometimes that's not the whole solution, and something might work for someone else because they did just have a technical sort of problem with social media, whereas you might have a more adaptive problem with social media. So adaptive is essentially the opposite of that, right? Like there's some deeper reason why you're doing it, which is not addressed by that kind of very simple behavioral fix. Okay, so for those of you who were at the Growth Edge workshop, you'll know this kind of general framework, but this is kind of some of the questions that you can use from that framework in anything that you are looking at, right? So the first is to identify what your goal is for social media. like what kind of relationship you would like to have with social media, right? And your goal might be like, I want to only use social media to, go and follow people that really inspire me, so that when I'm feeling a little bit low and I need some inspiration, that's where I go. And that's all I want to use social media for, right? Or your goal might be, I want to use WhatsApp for the conversations that I really find meaningful and the relationships that I really find meaningful, but I'm not going to, be on there. I'm not going to be available to everyone all of the time. I'm going to set certain times that I will be available, and I will maybe, set up calls with people so that there's not this constant chatting. So you get to decide what your goal is for social media use or tech use or whatever it is. Like, you can think of that as the goal or the relationship or how you would like to be using it, instead of it feeling like it's using you in some sense, or it has control over you, right? Again, this idea of self-authorship. Okay, so think of something that you would like, some kind of relationship that you'd like to have with social media. For you, it might be like completely, I just don't want to go on social media at all. I don't want to be on Facebook. I don't want to be on Instagram. I don't want to have WhatsApp. I feel like people should, send me a letter in the post, because that will like make sure that only the people that are closest to me, or phoning me or whatever, right? Like, you can decide what this is for you, right? Okay. And then part of that is coming up with a reason that feels compelling to you. Why do you want to have that particular kind of relationship with social media, right? Why is that important to you? We want to have some sort of reason that is coming from you internally. Again, self-authorship. I'll just keep saying self-authorship. But it is being intentional about it, right? So again, not feeling like it's using you, but that you are choosing that and you have some reason why that is internal, that is like specific for you, right? It doesn't work if we're doing it from obligation, like people say, I should do this, or like I need to like use social media less, but you don't have any like compelling reason for yourself why. So just know that it needs to be something that you really resonate with. Okay. And then the second is identify what might be the underlying resistance to changing your relationship with social media. So think of like a random boundary that you would want to set, right? Like, let's say you want to have 2 days a week where you completely do not access social media at all, right? If you had to imagine yourself doing that, like really imagine it, it helps you picture yourself doing that. Think about what would be bad about that? What would feel uncomfortable, or what would you worry about? What are you dreading? Like, identify what the resistance would be to doing that, because that usually gives you a lot more information. And you can start to realize like why there is this pull towards it in the first place. So the underlying idea is your behavior always makes sense. Okay, so if you are constantly checking social media, even though you committed not to, there's a reason you're doing that, and you want to find out why that is. So you want to identify like what is that underlying resistance to implementing whatever kind of boundary I would ideally like to set. And that gives you information. It's not about like bulldozing over that and like, oh, well, that's a dumb reason, like it's just about understanding yourself and to think about like, okay, what is it actually giving me, right? Like maybe, for example, if you had to delete your Instagram account, you would worry that you almost like left out of things. You're not going to know about cool things that are happening, or people, you're almost like going to become irrelevant in some way because no one can find you on Instagram. So like thinking about that underlying resistance. And then what we do with that is like noticing what the underlying assumption is, right? So in that example, it would be that one of the assumptions could be that if you aren't on social media, you become irrelevant. If you aren't on social media, you miss out on everything, right? So you're just noticing what that underlying resistance is, what assumptions underlie that. You don't have to go through this whole process. I must actually look at what the specific live is called, but I have a live on this process. But the point is just to look at, if my behavior makes sense, why does it make sense? What is underlying this? And then you can also use things like boundaries and things like certain changes that you make, use that as data gathering, right? So instead of saying from the get-go, okay, I am going to not use social media 2 days a week, right? And that's just like what I'm committing to. And then you get to that day and you're like, oh, well, I kind of want to check this, or like, I'm sure that person would have messaged me or whatever. And then you go onto social media and then you're using that as data. So instead of saying like, oh, I failed, I might as well just, I'm doomed to just have the same relationship with social media. Instead of that, you're like, oh, that's so interesting. I wonder why I did that, right? Or like, what was I thinking just before I went onto social media? What kind of reason was I using? What was I like pretending that it actually doesn't matter? Was I using some sort of excuse for that? Like just getting curious about what happens when you try out that thing, and that will help you gather data. It also works the other way, right? Like for example, for me, when I tried out not using social media for one of the days of the week, I gathered data, right? I didn't know what it would feel like. It could have felt like nothing. But I was pleasantly surprised by how amazing it was. And so it made it much easier for me to do that in the future. Whereas if I just from the beginning said like, this is what I'm committing to doing, I could have already had like some sort of resistance to that. There's this interesting resistance that we get as well to things that we commit to, because it feels like it's undermining our own autonomy, even though we made that decision. So it's like almost like past me made this decision for me, and now it's current me. Now it's future me that is now current. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to follow some like decision that I made. So that's also why it's important to get clear on like why you want to do this, and get clear on the fact that it's coming from you and not anyone else. And then you get to not sort of lie to yourself when you tell yourself like, oh, it's not that important, or like I didn't really care that much, or whatever it is, right? Like, so this process is a learning experience. It's a data gathering experience. And it makes the change much more sustainable and much more meaningful when you do end up doing it. And I do want you to think about like, even if social media, for example, I'm using social media a lot, but apply the same things to like WhatsApp, email, any like tech thing that you specifically are struggling with. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. So even if you like think of it as very addictive, right? Which social media is very addictive in its nature. It's kind of designed to be that way. Think about, for example, something that is addictive that you are not addicted to. So if you're not a smoker, right, you probably don't worry when there's a smoker around you, or when there's cigarettes around you. Like, you don't have this like, oh my goodness, you're not constantly using willpower to like resist that cigarette, right? It's like, it doesn't even have any pull on you. And I want you to think about the possibility of that with social media as well, or anything else that you think has like addictive qualities, right? It is still possible for it not to have an emotional pull on you, even though it might be addictive in nature, right? So think about it like, you don't need necessarily boundaries around smoking, for example, right? You don't need to avoid situations where you might be tempted to smoke, whatever it is. So we want to have that same, essentially that same goal, because we don't want to have that feeling of like always pulled by it, like controlled by it, all of that kind of stuff. So we want to understand why it has that pull on you. Again, assuming that your behavior makes sense, what would be the underlying reasons behind that behavior? And again, I'm going to say again, like, it's not obligation or should, but I mean that from both angles. So your reason for not doing it needs to not come from obligation or should, because it's just not a very effective way to make behavior change. But also using it needs to not come from obligation or should, right? So like if you think that it's just now the norm, right, to be constantly available on WhatsApp, remember that you do not have to match those norms, right? So the self-authorship goes for everything, what you do and what you don't do, right? So all of it is something that you can design, which I think is so exciting. It's so fun that we get to decide all of this, and we get to take responsibility for it, and we get to take ownership of that, and we get to design that relationship with social media and tech and email. This goes for boundaries with communication with your patient communications as well, right? Just because your patient expects that you are available to them 24/7 does not mean that you have to be available for them, right? You can have very clear boundaries about when you are going to be, when they can communicate with you, when they can't. And again, you're exploring like what feels uncomfortable about doing that. And I know this is again an example of like the technical versus adaptive, right? Like I know people who have set autoresponders, which is the technical like solution, and then still checking their email all the time, right? So that's an example of where it didn't solve the actual underlying problem. They had this like compulsive checking of it because they were anxious that they were going to miss something. They were anxious that, you know, a patient was going to be contacting them and they weren't going to be available for them and something bad would have happened and all of that. Like you can think about all these scenarios and you can solve for it. It doesn't have to be this like compulsive behavior. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to encourage you to create your own intentional relationship and boundaries with social media, with tech, with communication, even if that makes no sense to other people, right? Even if they think like you're a recluse, or that they're like, oh, why are you on social media? It's so bad for you, or whatever their opinions are, whatever their thoughts are about what you should or shouldn't be doing, you get to decide. And I would love to know what those things are. And you're also welcome to share things that you'd like to do, but you like have that internal resistance to it. You're like, ideally, if like no one was going to be mad and nothing was going to go wrong, this is what I would do. And then we can explore that together. So you're welcome to do that in the comments. And then we can all sort of chip in as well, because I think we all struggle with the same kinds of boundaries, the same kinds of issues in practice, the same struggles. And it's really nice for other clinicians to be able to see, like, I'm not alone in this struggle, right? And yeah, so I think it's important for us to share our stories as well. Okay, awesome. I will chat to you guys in the Facebook group, and I will keep you updated about that class that I'm running. Awesome. Have a good day.